This is Michigan wide receiver Roman Wilson.
There are manufactured touch slot wide receivers, and then there's slot wide receivers like Roman Wilson who can actually win a little bit down the field. I think the starting point is he's a very reliable player. Only 2% of his targets were dropped. 78% of his catchable targets went for a first down. That is very hard to do. I think for a slot wide receiver, he has more straight line speed than your traditional guy, but he just doesn't have the catch radius, the agility like some others. So there's a little bit pros and cons to his game.
Wow plays, some might say. Let's do some numbers that matter real quick, okay? 5'11", 185. He did run a 4.39 40, 1.52 10-yard split, a 93rd percentile shuttle, a 78th percentile three cone. Those all line up with really good slot wide receiver numbers. And sometimes we do like find this gray area with slot guys. I think Roman Wilson is legitimately just an inside wide receiver. I mean, 80 of his 109 targets over the last 2 years were out of the slot. And if you translate that, only 89 routes versus press coverage, according to PFF, over the last 2 seasons. Compare that again to the gray area slot guys. Ricky Pearsall had 205 routes versus press the last 2 years. Ladd McConkey, despite injuries, had 122. Now, what we have seen is, like you said, he has downfield speed. Some of these slot guys are getting a bit more vertical. He had a 13.9 ADOT this past season. 60% of his targets were 10 plus yards down the field, but just 3 for 8 with contested catches. Only forced 2 missed tackles last season, 9 total in his career. So what do you do with this? Because for me, if I was making one statement about Roman Wilson, is that I think there's a Roman Wilson in every single draft.
There are Roman Wilsons kind of littered everywhere. I think that you just have to hope that his straight line speed really translate where he can run away from nickel corners. And I think that's what I saw him the best. These crossing routes, especially off of play action in the Michigan offense, out routes, those type of things, you can get him running away. But I really like him on these crossing routes, mesh concepts where he can catch the ball, get some yards after the catch ability. All of his yards after the catch ability, like you said, though, comes because of his speed. He's not going to break tackles. He's just too small. And sometimes it's as easy as that. Like you said, only forced 9 missed tackles on 107 career receptions. That's about as low as it gets for this type of receiver, but you didn't get as many screen stuff, none of the easy kind of manufactured touches. He had to earn his looks, and there wasn't that many looks in this Michigan offense. So kind of a Shanahan slot wide receiver, play action, get him over the middle. I can see how that can be an effective player. I think like if you're looking for an upside comp for him, I came up with Randall Cobb, who had some catch radius concerns. Now, obviously, he went with Rodgers and posted some really ridiculous numbers for a stretch there. But I thought he was more of a straight line speed guy from the slot with a very similar frame to his body. So I think that's kind of the upside for Roman Wilson.
I do think he pulls away from man coverage on those crossers and on those overs. He'll start from here. He'll work 17 yards down the field from this point, and it's really tough for a dude to stick in his hip pocket for that long. And in fact, Michigan used him as their like full speed motion guy, which again at 4.39 or 1.52 10-yard split makes a ton of sense on top of that. I just went back over the last few years and like, let's just take 2023, for example. Here are the top slot targets among the top 23 in the NFL. And just looking at this group of like legit slot guys, I don't know who he plays like, you know? There are always slot receivers that pop up every single year here or there as like random producers because maybe they step into this role, contract year, they're attached to a really good quarterback or a team that really needs to throw the football a lot and they're super productive. But if we talk about, especially now in the league, that again, it's blurring the lines of, hey, this guy can be an outside wide receiver in 2 wide receiver sets and then move inside for mismatch purposes in 3 receiver sets. I think it's becoming less and less important to have just like a true role playing slot guy who, at least to me, if we're talking about multiple breaking routes and like setting a dude up, I didn't see that from him. Again, it was almost full speed routes from coast to coast. And that was the name of his game. However, did love how when JJ McCarthy would escape the pocket, Roman Wilson and him were very connected on those. There was almost a string between them. So on the scramble drill plays, Roman Wilson was constantly open and was very successful on them.
I think you can take your argument there as a pro or a con. The con is this just not a role that's super effective or super impactful in the NFL. You want to throw the ball downfield for the most part. And the pro could be, well, a lot of the slot wide receivers don't at least have his vertical playmaking ability. I think like Right now, it's Christian Kirk. I think Christian Kirk has a much bigger catch radius and plays a little bit bigger and outside of his frame
I thought
compared to
Roman
Roman
Wilson's catch
Wilson.
radius was like real bad.
And that's the problem, is because we're talking about
Or
these crossing
non-existent.
routes and working with speed. Well, if you're running sideways, if the ball's barely behind you, barely in front of you,
And Ricky Pearsall does a fantastic job of that.
right. And I think that the big thing you'd pointed to is a lot of the outside wide receivers in college that either don't have the separation ability or just might run better routes from where the slots are. They go from the outside to the inside, and there's your slot wide receivers in the NFL.
Right.
So going from slot only to slot only will take very particular type of skill set, and he doesn't have the lateral shakeability that the Amon-Ra St. Brown types have here. So you're kind of figuring out what exact offense is he going to. Maybe it's the Shanahan slot only type of guys, get him on these play action crossing routes. Maybe the Bengals, for example, that could be an option for him as well. But a very kind of weird slot only type of profile for Roman Wilson.
I'm not trying to bury him, but I am looking at him from like all 32 teams. Now, if he goes to, let's say, like the Minnesota Vikings and can take over a pure slot role if they want one, a la like what a KJ Osborne did at times, then like bang, we have a productive player in that environment. I don't count him to Russell Gage, who you remember like popped up with like a real big season for the Atlanta Falcons, got a good contract with Tom Brady and the Buccaneers, and then just got hurt and basically never played again. But it was a slot only guy who had a season based on the volume, but the longevity of it was kind of in question a little bit. I don't know, man. Let's even KJ Osborne and like even in my mind, Juju Smith-Schuster came to mind when looking at Roman Wilson. But obviously Juju's 2 inches taller, like 30 pounds heavier, awesome in contested situations. But in terms of like just the style of play on like the same over and crossing routes. But again, Roman is smaller, bad catch radius, and not winning contested. So like, what do you do with that, I guess is my question.
Well,
I am burying this dude by accident.
Well, let me make the bold case. He's now on the Chargers, and they're running the same play action offense, and it's Herbert slot wide receiver now putting up numbers. You know, like that's where I think. And I think when I started the show, because I was looking for the positive outcome here, and I think there are some. It's because of the speed, but also 78% of his catchable targets went for a first down. That is a really high number. Some of the first round wide receivers that we're talking about, like the Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, those type of guys, they're like at the 50%. We're talking about like 78% for Roman Wilson. Only 2% of his targets were dropped. So I think he's a very reliable guy. And I think that there's an element to this Michigan offense that everyone's going to be obsessed with. So I do think he's going to end up as a starter. I don't think he's going to be for every single team here. And I think that once we kind of digest the landing spot, we'll be able to paint a little bit clearer of a picture from him. But you and I saw the same exact athletic traits for him. And it's hard to like get into this production profile just because Michigan's offense didn't throw the ball. I think one of the reasons why they didn't do that is because the receivers weren't very good. And I thought JJ McCarthy was better than his wide receivers, and that's why they didn't throw the ball. The sad stat was 9 forced missed tackles over his entire career. Now we're going to the NFL. Ugh.
Again, producer Weaves, you need to throw up this list in comments. I would love for you to tell me who you think he plays like this. And I understand this is just from this past season, but top slot target getters. CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Adam Thielen, Tyler Boyd, Josh Downs, Jaden Reed. He doesn't play like Josh Downs. He doesn't play like Jaden Reed, right? Then we keep going down the list. He doesn't play like Demario Douglas. He doesn't play like Khalil Shakur. He doesn't play like Wan'Dale Robinson. You know, in the past, he's not a concise, multi-breaking route runner like Hunter Renfrow was, for example. He really is almost like this straight line from east
I can see
to
some
west.
Khalil Shakir, I guess, out of that list.
Yeah. I think Shakir is like more nimble,
a little more
and
physical,
like fluid as a player, I guess. I don't know. I feel like the NFL has kind of like outgrown this player in a little bit because they move people around so much more than they used to, of being very stationary with their 3 wide receiver sets. Whereas again, now we're getting like alphas in the slot a lot because these are spaces and advantageous matchups that play callers believe they can take advantage of.
To Roman Wilson's credit, he was not only in the slot, he was like 30% of his snaps were on the perimeter. Now, a lot of those were
he got like no targets there.
Right. And there was only 2 wide receivers on the field because they would use tight ends and fullbacks in Michigan's offense. So it's not the exact 1-to-1 comparison, but maybe somebody says, oh, for a couple plays, we can keep you out there. But yeah, I think we'll learn more about Roman Wilson's outlook once we digest the landing spot. It's a weird player.
Yeah, again, there were 27 teams that used 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets, more than 50% of the time, right? So he's going to be on the field for those teams more than 50% of the plays. I'm a little nervous when we solely look at or project a 3 wide receiver set player that can only play in 3 wide receiver sets, unless he shocks me. But as you said, if the landing spot hits, then I could be eating my words. And that's why we have draft review shows.
True. And maybe this is just our half PPR brain. Maybe if you are a full PPR scammer out there, maybe you like Roman Wilson's chances a little bit better than us.
All right. That does it. Go and watch the rest of the prospect videos that we have here on the channel. The more of you that subscribe, the more we get to do cool stuff. And that includes full wide receiver, quarterback, and running back rankings videos, which are on the way. So again, hit the button and we will talk to you all on the next one.